Question is order. Call John Hayes.
Mr. Speaker, the members that are promoting this bill across the other side of this House are economic illiterates. There are three ways of growing a business, and none of those ways involve locking up 75% of the ownership of a company in a way that would bring this country to its knees. Now, the bill proposes, Mr. Speaker, I don't need to shout, I'm discussing ideas. The bill proposes that there should be a referendum, a public referendum. Well, there was a public referendum at the last election. And I was in Mr. Cosgrove's seat, the electorate that he was busy trying to become the Member of Parliament for, and I was listening to what the community was saying. And they were not supportive of his ideas because he was campaigning against the National Party. He did not support asset sales. Now, why didn't he phone his good mate Mike Moore in Washington, New Zealand's outstanding ambassador in Washington, head of the WTO, been a minister in Labor cabinets over a long period of time? Why didn't he ring his mate Mike and say, "Hey Mike, am I on the right track with this legislation? I've got a lot of time on my hands now, I'm a list MP, I'm looking for a private member's bill to write. Would this be a good one?" Because if he had, Mike Moore would have said, "No, forget it. You're absolutely on the right track." Mr. Cosgrove is also in the Finance and Economic Select Committee, and he may remember, if his memory is going to last that long, that John Palmer, Chair of Air New Zealand, spent about 30 minutes in our committee extolling the virtues of mixed public-private ownership and its benefit to Air New Zealand. I'm not sure why Mr. Cosgrove wouldn't have heard what Mr. Palmer was saying, a well-respected businessman in this community, and he was saying, forget it. This is not a smart deal. You get much greater synergy, much greater much better decision-making when you bring in representatives of the private sector to run the board. Mr. Speaker, we stood at the last election and we said we're going to be selling up to 49% of assets in state-owned companies. Why are we doing that? Because we do not wish to borrow more than 30% of GNI as debt, and we are going to invest the proceeds from the sale, first of all in the community by giving it a broader capital base and share options for older folk who are retiring and want to cash flow into their retirement. We are going to use the money to benefit our young people through better education facilities, and my electorate in the Wairarapa has no shortage of need in that, to bring our 100-odd-year-old schools up to today's technology. And we're going to spend money on hospitals to again look after our older and younger people in the community. Mr. Speaker, we have passed legislation that guarantees the government will own at least 51% of the energy companies and prevent any other shareholder from owning more than 10%. There is no need for this bill, Mr. Speaker. Why would you completely clog up any ability in this community to move sensibly forward with an elected administration? Under an MMP system, you have to involve a cross-party selection of other parties in this House, and I think that if you go to the community, you get their backing, then this particular draft of bill simply trying to fill up this House with absolute nonsense. It is a bill that will not pass. I do not support it, because what it would lock us into is higher debt, higher interest rates, lower gradings from Standard & Poor's, and I think what we need to do is to broaden the pool of investments for New Zealand savers and deepen our capital markets. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I do not agree with this bill at all. Thank you.
The Honourable Clayton Cosgrove,
Speaker,
5 minutes in reply.
I'm not sure whether that was a good impression of Dr. Doolittle.